Hey everybody. I'm kind of sad because I think this is my last video for you. And even though I have not been able to see your faces for a while, I have enjoyed continuing to talk to you. So I'm sad, but hopefully we will see each other again in the fall when you're hanging around Sampson, because hopefully we'll all be back in person, and that would be amazing. So this is the last video, and the whole goal of it is to go over the preparation for your final exam. So your final exam is going to be on Canvas, similar to exam 3 in the way that it functioned. But it is primarily multiple choice with some short answer questions at the end, okay? You will only have 50 minutes to complete it though, because it is not a long exam at all. Okay, so I'm gonna go over sort of all the resources that are available to you right now that you might be looking at while you're trying to prepare and study, etc. So I've tried to be really straightforward, and these are actually the same materials that I use when we're in person as well. But the whole goal of this end of term exam is just to make sure that we go back and we cover the topics that I feel like you really need to have a good handle on before you move on, specifically to your capstone course. Okay, so these are the things that I kind of just picked out of what we've covered that I think, you know what, you should know what these are. Like, I should be able to just say, hey, positive skew, and you can think about what that is as a psychology major. If you're not a psychology major, I still am thinking that these topics are things that you'll want to carry forward with you into your discipline. So the whole goal here is for you to sort of go through the material, make sure that you have a good answer prepared for all of these different topics. And I really want for you to focus on retention. Okay, I want you to focus on the fact that you're going to need to know this stuff later on in your degree. So just try now to master it. Okay. Okay, so let's just get into this. It says the following topics will be assessed using multiple choice and short answer questions. So knowing about a positive and negative skew, know what they look like. Continuous versus categorical variables. This is very important. It comes up over and over and over again. So you do need to know the difference. Hopefully you can think of, if you start out with thinking about categorical variables, that's probably the best place to start. So if you're thinking about ethnicity, that could be a categorical variable. If you're thinking about year in school, favorite color, hair color, all those things would be categorical variables, right? So the answers are categories, all right? A continuous variable is going to be something where you're kind of going from low to high on a scale. Typically, we like for our scale points to have at least 5 scale points for us to treat it as a continuous variable in psychology. So a 1 to 5 scale, like, so when we did the big 5, I would treat that as a continuous scale. Okay. Relationship between standard deviation and variance. Oh my goodness, you guys, we have talked about standard deviation and variance so much in this class. Please know how they're related to each other. Okay, so remember, standard deviation is the lowercase s, variance is s squared, right? So if you have the standard deviation and you want the variance, you just square it, right? If you have the variance and you want standard deviation, then you take the square root of it. All right, so try to commit those things to memory. Knowing what one-tailed versus two-tailed hypotheses are. Very important. A one-tailed hypothesis is when you're predicting a specific direction, but a two-tailed hypothesis is when you think your groups will be different, or you think you're going to find an effect, like a significant effect, but you don't know what direction it's going to be in. Type 1 versus type 2 errors. Okay. So I recommend that you go back to all of your notes for this one. But basically, a type 1 error is when you reject the null, but you shouldn't have, right? In the sense that in the study, you found that whatever you were investigating, it worked, like your research was supported. So you're super excited, but in the real world, it wouldn't have worked. Okay, so it was a fluke, right, that it worked in your study. A type 2 error is when you fail to reject the null, so your research hypothesis is not supported, you're very sad, but in the real world, it would have been supported. This happens a lot when we don't have enough people in our study, so to show that our effect is not due to chance, okay? Remember when we're talking about significance testing, it's all about the likelihood that the difference that you're seeing or the effect that you're seeing, the likelihood that it's due to chance, okay? So we would like for it to be very unlikely that it's due to chance, okay? Let's see. Difference between a dependent samples t-test and an independent samples t-test. You do need to know those differences, and you do need to be able to have an example. So dependent samples t-test, pre-test, post-test, before, after. Independent samples t-test are when you have two groups and the people in the groups are different from each other. Independent and dependent variables. So I hypothesized that older people will present themselves as wiser than younger people. So you would need to be able to look at that and know what's the independent variable in this situation and what is the dependent variable. So the independent variable could be something like age. So we're looking at how age is related to wisdom. So age is the independent variable and wisdom is the dependent variable. On the exam, you'll have a scenario and then you'll be asked a lot of different questions about it. So one might be, what is the independent variable in this scenario, in this study? What is a correlation? Positive versus negative. Be able to think of two things that would be positively correlated with each other, two things that might be negatively correlated with each other. Let's see. Independent variable, dependent variable. That's not going to be related there. Okay, so self-esteem and depression. So how are self-esteem and depression correlated? So higher scores on self-esteem go with lower scores on depression, and that would be a negative correlation. Okay, so when positive scores go with positive scores, that's going to be a positive correlation. But when they don't match, when positive scores go with negative scores, that's a negative correlation. Hold on. Okay. Difference between a t-test and an ANOVA. Specifically here, I'm talking about a one-way ANOVA. So a t-test, especially an independent samples t-test, is when you are looking at two groups and comparing them. And what you gain with a one-way ANOVA is that you can look at more than two groups. Okay, you can look at a lot of different groups if you wanted to. You do need to be able to talk about p-values, you guys. Specifically, I need for you to be able to recognize if a p-value is significant, all right? So I might give you a lot of different p-values and be like, hey, is this significant or not significant? A p-value is significant if it's less than 0.05, okay? So you should be able to identify that. And then you might need to know what certain symbols mean, like M, S, D, R, T, mean, standard deviation, correlation, and a t-value. How do you find an overall mean for a variable? So this is going to require you to think back to your fun time in SPSS and think through how would you go about finding the mean of a variable. So let's just say you're looking at your data and you want to know what the mean is for age. Okay, you actually had to do that. How would you go about figuring that out? Okay, We would go to analyze, descriptive statistics, and then you kind of had some options. You could go to frequencies or you could go to descriptives, and you could get the mean either way. How do you find a variable's range? Really, you just need to know the minimum and the maximum, and you can get that from frequencies as well. How do you run an independent samples t-test? Okay, so you're going to go to analyze, compare means, independent samples t-test. How do you find a Cronbach's alpha? What is a Cronbach's alpha? Finding the Cronbach's alpha, just analyze scale and reliability analysis, but what is the Cronbach's alpha? Okay, essentially when you're looking at the Cronbach's alpha, you remember how I said for a scale we really liked for our Cronbach's alphas to be 0.7 or higher. That's because we're looking at the extent to which all the items on the scale correlate with each other. Okay, so we want for those to be high correlations because we're essentially treating them like the same variable. So we would expect that they would be highly correlated with each other. Okay. All right. So here's the interpretation part of the exam. You will be shown some independent samples t-test results from SPSS, and then I will ask you some questions about it. Okay, so I have the questions down here. All right, how many people are in the study? Okay, how many people are in this study? So in order to figure this out, you have your n's here. So you know for the number of men and women. So you could say 37. Okay. On average, how approachable do men want others to see them as? Okay. So if you can look over here, like this is the question. On a typical day, how approachable do you want other people to see you? And we have men and women. So you want to know on average, how approachable do men want others to see them as? Okay. So you're on average. So you're looking for the mean. So over here, you could say 8.50. Remember, I want you to keep 2 decimal places, so remember that. On average, that's the other one I did. Are your variances for men and women equal? How do you know? This is a little tricky. We're talking about Levene's test for equality of variances, this part, okay? Are your variances equal? Are your variances equal? This right here is testing whether or not your variances for your 2 groups are equal. Now, we want for them to be equal. If you remember back to our discussions in independent samples t-test and the assumptions, we talked about homogeneity of variance. We assume that the variances for our 2 groups are relatively the same. And this is actually an official test of that, making sure that they are about the same. And so the way we would know that they're equal, okay, is we would just check right here under this sig column under Levene's test. We would just make sure that this sig value was above 0.05, which I know is not what you're used to hearing, okay, but if it's above 0.05, it means the variances are equal. They're the same. Okay, so then we would be able to come over here and be like, yep, equal variances are assumed. So when I look at my t value, I can focus on equal variances assumed lines, right? Now, if I look at the sig column here and it is, let's say 0.042, if it was 0.042, I'd be like, oh man, it's telling me that my variances are different. Okay, so that means that my variances are not the same. So I cannot say, I have to say equal variances are not assumed, okay, because they're not equal. Which would mean that when I talk about my t-test, I'm going to have to come down here and look at these values. And some of you guys had to do that in your paper, okay? You guys did a really good job, actually, of paying attention to all that. So very proud of you. Okay, so it says, are your variances for men and women equal? We say yes, they're equal because the p-value here for the sig column is above 0.05. And how do we know? We could say because Levine's test sig column is above 0.05. So there you go. Is your t-test significant? So in order to know if your t-test is significant, you're going to look at the sig two-tailed column here, okay? Because if you see up here, this says t-test for equality of means. So all this information here is about your t-test. So we have the t, we have the degrees of freedom, we have the sig two-tailed, which is our p-value. We have a mean difference, but we don't really need that, okay? So here, if I'm looking at my sig two-tailed, I'm using the top line because my variances are equal, so I can use the top line. Then I'm going to look at the sig two-tailed value. It is not less than 0.05. So that means my groups are not significantly different, which is sad. Oh well. So is my t-test significant? No, it's not. Okay, not significant. If you're going to report this t-test in a paper, how would you write it? Okay, so there's a couple of different ways we could do this, but we need to be able to talk about, think about your t-test from your paper. How did you write it up? You probably had an initial sentence that said an independent sample t-test was used to assess whether men and women were different on how approachable they wanted to be seen as, period. You don't have to do that first sentence, but you do have to pick up after that where you say, let's see, male participants, okay? And then after you'd say male participants, you would have their mean and standard deviation. So let's see here. We're going to do this one together. Male participants. Go back up here. 8.50. And then you need the standard deviation too. I think it's 1.77, but I'll check that. And I don't know if it'll let you do this on the Canvas. If it does, then you can italicize your little symbols, but if it doesn't, that's okay. Okay, male participants, we're gonna say they're not significantly different. So I'm just gonna say male participants did not significantly differ on how approachable they wanted to be seen as compared to female participants. And need their mean and standard deviation too. So 8.59. 1.52. Okay, and then you would have a comma and you'll have your T statement. So T and then your degrees of freedom will be 35. Equals whatever our T value is, which is negative 0.14. And our P value is equal to 0.892. Okay, so I'm going to go back in here and italicize these things. Okay, so you guys just did your paper, so I don't think that this is too, unfamiliar to you. In addition, you have another handout on Canvas that has all the answers to all of this, okay? So you're not even technically making your own review sheet because the answers are already there for you. But it's helpful for you to do them on your own. It'll help you. Then you also have another document. I have it pulled up here. Okay, this is just more practice with the t-test stuff. So you got that one, you got that one. I think there's, yeah, 3 more examples. And then there's another sheet that gives you the answers for those. So you have a lot to practice with. You know my policy for these exams online. We're doing open note. So you're welcome to have any of this open as you do it. I do not allow you to work together though, or take any help from someone else, period. So it is you on your own with your stuff answering the exam question. So anything other than that does get considered as cheating, and you will get a 0. Okay. All right. If you have questions, you can reach out to me. I'm here for you. The exam is Monday. It will be available from 10 until midnight. And like I said, it is 50 minutes. Okay. So not a lot of time. That's intentional. Number 1, it's not long. And number 2, I want for you to actually know the stuff. Otherwise, you'd sit there and just try to look up every single thing. And that's not the purpose of an exam. Okay, so make sure that you're studying and that you know how to answer these questions, and you should be good to go. I'm excited about reading all those papers that I'm going to get in tonight. I hope that's going well. Anyway. Okay. Well, I will talk to y'all later. Reach out to me if you need anything.